Hi guys, how's it going? It's Sense the Skeleton here. Be sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell for more content. Thanks! Before we get into it, we only have 5 chapters of Dealing with Dragons left. So excited! Afterward, you can put in the comments what you'd actually like to read next. Make sure nothing inappropriate. And my email is in the 100 subscriber video. But let's get back into reading Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Reed. Chapter 11, in which Kazul is unwell and Cimmerine makes a new acquaintance. Alianora decided to return home by way of the path outside instead of through the tunnels because it was such a nice day and she hoped the sun would dry her skirt. Cimmerine watched her go, swinging her basket happily and humming a little. Her confidence and good humor completely restored by the possession of the fat little packet of dried feverfew in her pocket. I wish I had as little to worry about, Cimmerine muttered, thinking of Warog and the wizards. She held the burned patch at the end of her sleeve up to get a better look at it in the sunlight, and shook her head. Even the magic wardrobe would have a hard time fixing that. A puff of wind made her shiver in her wet clothes, and she turned to go back into the cave to change. A dark shadow fell over Cimmerine, and she stopped and looked up. "Kazul!" she said as the dragon landed on the open path beside her. "Am I glad to see you? Wait until you hear what's been happening." "You do appear to have had a rather strenuous day," Kazul said, eyeing Cimmerine's wet-stained skirt and the blackened end of her right sleeve. "Nothing serious, I trust?" "I'm not sure," Cimmerine said. "Alianora and I went out to pick some feverfew and we ran into that wizard Antorel." "Where was this?" Cimmerine pointed. "Up that way. There's a little round valley off to one side that looks as if the dragons never go there, and—" "You found a wizard there?" Kazul sounded deeply disturbed. "How did he get in? How did you get in?" "We climbed through a crack in a boulder," Cimmerine said. "I don't know how Antorel did it. When he left, he was heading for the far side of the valley." "This is serious," Kazul said, getting to her feet. I'd better warn the king. He'll have to use the crystal now." "You'd better hear the rest of it first," Cimmerine said. "Antorel wasn't too happy to see us, but when he found out that Alianora was Warog's princess, he relaxed. He seemed to think that Warog had sent us." "What?" Cimmerine involuntarily stepped back a pace at the anger in Kazul's voice. "He thought Warog had sent us," she repeated, and gave a quick summary of her conversation with Antorel. "Warog!" Kazul's tail lashed, sweeping a small boulder from one side of the path to the other. "But Warog's not a fool, and only a fool would let a wizard into that valley, unless he was sure that they didn't know. What was Antorel doing?" "Cutting plants," Cimmerine said. "Or rather, cutting a plant. It didn't look as if he took more than one." "He wouldn't need more than one, if it was the right one," Kazul said tensely. "What did he pick?" "It's a prickly-looking purple thing with saw-edged leaves," Cimmerine said, reaching into her pocket. "I didn't recognize it, but I thought you might, so I brought a piece back for you to look—" "What?" Kazul roared. Flames spurted from the dragon's mouth, enveloping Cimmerine. Steam hissed from her wet skirt, and the thinner material of her sleeves vanished in a crackle of sparks. The handkerchief-wrapped spray of purple leaves, which she had just taken out of her pocket to show Kazul, disintegrated into a dark, greasy cloud of smoke. Cimmerine stared at the ashes in her palm, feeling very, very glad that she had decided to test the way the fresh feverfew would work in the fireproofing spell. She felt a little warm, and her clothes had been reduced to just to a few charged rags, but that was nothing compared to what might have happened. Now I understand why Eleonora ran out of feverfew, she muttered. A puff of wind brushed Simrine's arm, and she heard a choking sound from Kazul. She looked up, expecting to find the dragon laughing at her remark, and her eyes widened. Kazul's head was thrown back and her mouth was wide open, giving Simrine an excellent view of the dragon's sharp silver teeth and long red tongue. Simrine skipped backward out of reach. Then she realized that the dragon was gasping for air. "Kazul, what's the matter?" "The smoke," Kazul coughed. Her voice was so hoarse it was hard for Simrine to understand what she was saying. "What can I do?" Simrine said, trying not to feel frightened. "Green tar. Shelf in the last treasure room," Kazul managed between coughs. "Hurry!" Simrine was already running through the mouth of the cave as fast as her feet could carry her. She did not even pause as she snatched up her lamp from the floor, just inside the door. It seemed to take forever to get through the twisty passages and the first two caves full of treasure. She skidded to a halt in the doorway of the third room and stood panting, scanning the walls for the shelf and the right jar. She found it quickly and ran back at once, the jar clutched tightly in her right hand. The sound of Kazul's coughing grew louder as Simrine sped back the way she had come. At the mouth of the cave, Simrine paused and set down the lamp, then unscrewed the top of the green jar. Inside was a thick emerald-colored liquid about the consistency of honey. She looked out at Kazul. The dragon's head jerked with each cough, and the scales on her neck were beginning to turn pink around the edges. For a long, careful moment, Simrine studied Kazul's movements. Then she leaned back and threw the emerald liquid, jar and all, into the dragon's open mouth, just as Kazul took another gasping breath. The jar landed on Kazul's tongue. The dragon's mouth closed, and she swallowed convulsively. Sudden silence descended. "Are you all right now?" Simrine asked after Kazul had taken several deep breaths without a renewed bout of coughing. "I will be," Kazul said. She sounded exhausted, and her movements as she slid into the cave were slow and uncertain. "What happened?" Simrine said, backing out of the way so that Kazul would not have to exert herself to go around. "I got a breath of the smoke when the plant in your hand burned," Kazul said as she settled to the floor just inside the entrance. "Lucky it was only a breath. I'll need a few days of rest, but that's better than being dead." Simrine stared at her, appalled. What was that plant? "Dragon's bane," said Kazul. Her eyes closed and she slept. Kazul continued to sleep for most of the next 3 days. She woke only long enough for Simrine to pour a couple of gallons of warm milk mixed with honey down her throat from time to time before she lapsed back into unconsciousness. Simrine was very worried, but there wasn't much that she could do. Sick dragons are too large and heavy for normal nursing. Sick dragons were too large and heavy for normal nursing to be of much use. On the afternoon of the third day, Kazul woke up completely for the first time since her collapse. "Thank goodness," said Simrine as Kazul shook her head experimentally and sat up. "I was beginning to think you were going to sleep for a month." "I might have if I had gotten more than a whiff of that smoke." Kazul stretched her neck in one direction and her tail in the other, trying to work out some kinks. "If I'd known it was so dangerous, I'd never have brought any of that purple plant back with me," Simrine apologized. "You might have done worse than sleep for a month. You might have..." She stopped, unwilling to complete the thought. "I might have died," Kazul said. "Unlikely. If a dragon isn't killed outright by something in the first 5 minutes, recovery is only a matter of time. That applies as much to Dragon's Bane as to a knight's magic sword." "Then why did you want that goo in the green jar?" Simrine asked. "The antidote? I wanted it because I didn't like the idea of spending a month recuperating when I didn't have to. And since A fit of coughing interrupted Kazul in mid-sentence. Simrine skipped backward out of the way. Frowning worriedly, she tossed a pinch of feverfew into the air and recited the verse from the fireproofing spell in case Kazul should lose control of her flame again. Maybe you won't need a month to recover, but 3 days obviously isn't enough, she said to the dragon. You'd better light back down before you choke. I can't, Kazul said. I have to warn the king. If the wizards have had Dragon's Bane for 3 days already. She started coughing again and had to stop talking. You stay here, Simrine said in a firm tone. I'll warn the king. Tokaz won't listen to you, Kazul said. But she settled back to the ground. Roxam will go. Start with him. Roxam? Simrine said doubtfully. She was afraid of the gray-green dragon would want to go charging out after the wizards as soon as he heard they were up to something. He'll listen to you, and the king will listen to him, Kazul said. It's not ideal, but it's the best we can do. All right, I'll go see Roxam. You stay here and sleep. When you get back, I'll wake you and tell you what he said, Simrine promised. Now go to sleep. Kazul smiled slightly and closed her eyes. Simrine caught up a lamp and almost ran to the exit at the back of the Simrine caught up a lamp and almost ran to the exit at the back of the cave. She was afraid that Kazul would think of something else and start talking again, and she didn't think talking would be good for her. In the tunnel outside, Simrine paused, trying to remember the directions to Roxam's cave. She had memorized a map in the library and that showed most of the twists and turns of the dragon's tunnels. But she knew from experience that in the miles of gray stone corridors it was... Let me start over. She had memorized a map in the library that showed most of the twists and turns of the dragon's tunnels. But she knew from experience that in the miles of gray stone corridors, it was difficult to keep track of where she was. Left, fifth, right, past the little chamber, right again, on past the iron gate, 2 lefts to the 3rd cave down. She muttered to herself, I wish Roxam's cave were closer. Still muttering, she started off. Though she was being very careful, Simrine had to backtrack twice during the first part of her trip when a mistake in counting corridors led her to a dead end. When she finally saw the iron gate that led to the Caves of Fire and Night, she sighed in relief. The tricky part was over, and the rest of the trip would be easy. She held her lamp up and quickened her step, hoping to make up some time she had lost on her detours. Then, as she reached the bars that blocked the entrance to the Caves of Fire and Night, she stopped short. There was someone sitting on the ground on the other side of the gate. Simrine had almost missed seeing him, and no wonder. His clothes, though well cut, were the same dark gray as the stone of the tunnel walls, and he was curled into a lumpy, dejected ball. He looked like a large rock. If he hadn't moved his hand as she passed, Simrine would never have realized he was alive. The man on the other side of the bars raised his head, and Simrine saw with shock that his hair and skin were the same dark, even gray as his clothes. His eyes, too, were gray, and their expression was apologetic. Forgive me for startling you, the man said, climbing ponderously to his feet. I didn't see you coming. He made a stiff, formal bow. Who are you? Simrine demanded. And what are you doing in there? I'm a prince, the man said in a gloomy tone, and I'm reaping the rewards of my folly. What folly? The prince sighed. It's a long story. Somehow they always seem to be long, Simrine said. You haven't come to rescue me from dragons, have you? Because if you have, I'm not going to let you out of there. I haven't got time to spend an hour arguing today. I have no interest whatever in dragons, I assure you, the prince said earnestly. And if you would let me out, I'd be extremely grateful. Who are you, by the way? Cimmerine, Princess of the Dragon Kazul, Cimmerine said. She studied the prince for a moment and decided that he looked trustworthy. All right, I'll let you out. Turn around and put your fingers in your ears. What? The prince said, looking considerably startled. It's part of the spell to open the gate, Cimmerine said. She wasn't about to let him overhear the words Kazul had used to unlock the door, even if he did look trustworthy. The prince shrugged and did as she directed. Quickly, Cimmerine recited. Oh no, not again. Fine. By night and flame and shining rock, open thou thy hidden lock, Alberolingard. Try saying that 10 times fast. For an instant, nothing happened, and Cimmerine was afraid she had not remembered the charm correctly. Then the iron gate swung silently open. The prince, whose back was to the gate, did not notice. Cimmerine touched his shoulder to get his attention, and her eyes widened. Oh, she said as he turned. Your stone! I know, the prince said. It's part of that long story I mentioned earlier. I haven't gotten used to it yet. He stepped through the gate, and it closed noiselessly behind him. I'm afraid I don't have time to listen to stories just now, Cimmerine said politely. I have a rather urgent errand to run, so if you'll excuse me. Can't I come with you? Cimmerine stared at him. Why do you want to do that? The stone prince looked down at his feet with an embarrassed expression. Well, actually, I'm lost, and you seem to know your way around here. He glanced hopefully at Cimmerine's face, then sighed. I suppose I can just wander around some more. I'll have to find a way out eventually. You'll run into a dragon and get eaten. I don't think it will hurt stone, the prince said. He sounded almost cheerful, as if he had only just realized that being made of stone might have some advantages. Maybe not, but you're sure to give a dragon indigestion, Cimmerine said. Father, I don't have time for this. I could wait here if you're coming back this way, the stone prince suggested. Cimmerine brightened, then frowned and shook her head. No, one of the dragons might need to get into the caves of fire and night, or it might be the turn of those dreaded wizards. You can't stay here. Then, I know, you can wait in the serving room, just off the banquet hall, Cimmerine said. It's close, there's plenty of room, and I know no one's using it today because I checked the schedule for Eleonora yesterday. I can take a shortcut out the back to get to Roxham's without losing any more time. Come on. I really appreciate this, the stone prince said as they started off. You don't know what it's like being lost in the dark in these caves. How did it happen? Cimmerine asked. The stone prince's expression became gloomy once more. It's all the soothsayer's fault, he said. Soothsayer? My father didn't think it was appropriate to invite fairies to a prince's christening, so he invited a soothsayer instead, the prince replied. The soothsayer took one look at me and said I would grow up to do a great service for a king. I've been stuck with his blasted prophecy ever since. It doesn't sound so terrible to me, Cimmerine said. It wasn't at first, the stone prince admitted. I had special tutors and all sorts of interesting things to prepare me for being of great service to a king. My father even sent me to a special school for people who are supposed to do special things. Did you do well? I was the top of my class, the stone prince said with a flash of pride. His face fell again. That's part of the problem. I don't understand, Cimmerine said. This way, and can you walk a little faster, please? I'm in a hurry. It's been 3 years since I graduated, and everyone's still waiting for me to do something spectacular, the stone prince said, lengthening his stride. The rest of my classmates are already making names for themselves. George started killing dragons right away, and Art went straight home and pulled some sort of magic sword out of a rock. Even the ones nobody expected to amount to much have done something. All Jack wanted to do was go back to his mother's farm and raise beans, and he ended up stealing a magic hop and killing a giant and all sorts of things. I'm the only one who hasn't succeeded. Why not? The Stone Prince sighed again. I don't know. At first it seemed as if I wouldn't have any trouble finding a king to serve. Every time there was a war, both kings asked me to lead their armies, and every king for miles around who'd lost his throne to a usurper sent a messenger to my father's court. It would have been simple, only they were always so worried about whether I was going to side with their enemy that it was a lot easier not to pick anyone. I see, said Cimmerine. Privately, she thought that the Stone Prince had been rather wishy-washy. Some of her opinion must have crept into her tone, because the Stone Prince nodded glumly. You're right, it was a mistake. As long as I didn't pick a king to serve, all the messengers and ambassadors and envoys stayed, hoping to persuade me. The inns around the castle were stuffed with them. It got to the point where I couldn't show my face without at least 3 of them pouncing on me. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore and I ran away. It was a relief at first, not having everyone hover over me, waiting for me to do something great, but after a while I started feeling uncomfortable. Then I realized that even if nobody around me expected me to do anything special in the service of a king, I expected me to do something. I was so flustered that I ran up to the next palace I saw and asked whether the king needed any services done. It turned out that he was ill, and his doctors had told him that the only thing that would cure him was a drink from the water of healing from the caves of Fire and Night. So I left to get it at once. So that's what you were doing, Cimmerine said. The Stone Prince gave her another gloomy nod. I should have known better. That king had 3 sons, and the first 2 had already gone off to get water and failed. Anyone with sense would have seen that the youngest son was the one who would succeed. Sticks out all over, but I was too eager to do my great service and get it over with, and I didn't stop and think. What happened? It took me a long time to find the caves of Fire and Night, but once I did, it wasn't hard to find the water of healing. The chamber's getting crowded. All the princes who've tried to get the water and failed have been turned into slabs of rock. I know. I've seen them. Watch out for your head. The ceiling is low along here. Then you know what it's like, and you've seen 2 dippers on the wall by the spring. The Stone Prince's shoulders sagged. I knew I should use the tin one. It was one of the first things we learned at school, but I thought it wouldn't do any harm if I just looked at the gold one. So I took it off the wall, and as soon as I touched it, I started to stiffen up. Said Cimmerine. The Stone Prince was obviously well aware of how foolishly he had behaved. She saw no reason to make him feel worse by pointing it out to him again. So I stuck my arm in the spring, the prince said. You stuck your arm... Oh, I see. That was clever, Cimmerine said. Do you really think so? The Stone Prince asked anxiously. I thought that since the water from the spring was going to turn all the slabs of stone back into princes, when someone finally succeeds in the quest, then the water ought to keep me from turning into a slab of stone in the first place. Only it didn't work in the way I expected. He finished disconsolately. I can see that, Cimmerine said, but at least you can still do things. It would be much worse to have to lie there waiting for the right prince to come along and break the spell. I wouldn't have had to lie there very long, the Stone Prince said. That king's youngest son is going to arrive any day now. I just know it. Anyway, if I were a slab of stone, I wouldn't know about it until after it was all over and I'd been turned back into a prince again. How do you know? Cimmerine demanded. Have you ever been a stone slab? The Stone Prince looked startled. No, I haven't. I never thought of that. Well, start thinking now, Cimmerine said tartly. Here's the service room. Wait here for me, and don't go wandering off if I'm late getting back. I don't know how long this errand is going to take, and it could and it would be very awkward for me if the dragons found you roaming through their tunnels. I'll remember, the Stone Prince promised. But what do I do if someone comes in? Duck into the banquet area, Cimmerine said, showing him. And if someone comes in there too, curl up in a corner and pretend you're a rock. All right, the prince said doubtfully. Cimmerine did not like leaving him, but she was even less enthusiastic about taking him to see Roxem. Roxem probably wouldn't object to the prince himself, though Cimmerine suspected that there might have been some difficulty over his proposed theft of the Water of Healing, but explaining everything to the Gray-Green Dragon would take hours. Roxem was nice, but he tended to take a simple view of things, and the prince's situation was anything but simple. So Cimmerine gave the prince one more warning just to make sure he understood, and started off towards Roxem's cave to finish her errand. And that is the end of chapter 11. I hope you enjoyed the listen and have a good night.